Welcome back to Mental Health Mondays. Today we are talking about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, kind of sorting out what that means, what's behind that. Again, this is just meant to be a brief overview with some tools and resources that you can utilize. I'm not a physician, but I do have some clinical background, some familial experience, particularly with this one with ADD, ADHD. I have 5 siblings, and all of them were diagnosed with some form of this at a fairly young age. And so my family went into a lot of discovery and learning, and it's still been a learning curve as I continue to learn more about it. And maybe part of having 5 siblings that deal with some version or some part of this has showed me just how unique and versatile this condition is. It manifests differently in each one of those siblings and presents different and unique challenges for each of those. So I'm sure that that is the same for everyone who's, struggling with, a part or a piece of ADD or ADHD disorder. So as I was doing more current research about it, they've kind of simplified a little bit the diagnosis or how they diagnose it, at least the criteria. So what are we looking for here? We're looking for inattention, and that can be disorganization, problem staying on task, constant daydreaming, not paying attention, short attention span. But then we're also looking for impulsivity. That includes like spontaneity, spur of the moment, not thinking through, not having the ability. We're not saying that they're just being careless. We're saying that they may be lacking the ability to think through the long term or the potential consequences, and they want to act for immediate results, immediate reward. And so you'll see this with a lot of interrupting or, unable to wait for the result or the end of something. And then the third one, which is probably what people are most commonly think about when they hear, oh, I have ADHD, is the hyperactivity, the squirming, the fidgeting, the tapping, the talking, I can't sit still, I have to be moving, I have my little quirks and my little tics, I can't stop, rubbing my fingers or things like that, especially when it's not appropriate. It's not about, oh, I can sit still when I'm at work, but I can't do it at home, or vice versa. There really isn't that control there. It's a mental thing as much as it is a behavioral manifestation. So those are kind of the components that we're looking for when they're making a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD. And then as I was doing a little bit more research, they really are just calling it ADHD, the full, instead of ADD. And so ADHD, predominantly inattentive presentation. So that's normally what used to be just ADD. And then we have our ADHD, predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation, and then a combined presentation. And I was like, well, isn't the combined present, so we're talking about both of them then? But so it has both inattentive and hyperactive impulsive symptoms. So I'll break that down, but there is the combination presentation, which means, of course, that everyone is unique in how this presents and manifests in your life. To make a diagnosis of ADD, ADHD, for a child under 16, they have to have 6 or more symptoms of inattention or hyperactivity, whichever one we're looking at, 5 or more for older teens for at least 6 consecutive months. So they're looking for not only a large amount of symptoms, but a long period of time that these are manifesting. I will say, and I'm going to get this into a minute, ADD, ADHD is one of the most commonly misdiagnosed conditions. It's kind of the exclusionary diagnosis. They've ruled out everything else. It's not that, it's not this, it's not that. Okay, so it must be ADD, kind of a diagnosis of last resort, if you will. That's not saying I don't want to diminish or belittle, those who actually do have this condition. But I think it's very important that we realize that there's a lot of things that can be misdiagnosed for this, and I'll get to that in a second. So talking about the ADD inattentive, so that's the predominantly or more like what we used to call ADD, like I said, these ones aren't necessarily hyperactive. They don't have the high energy. In fact, these people can be shy in their own world, but they're having trouble paying attention. They're easily distracted and sidetracked. They don't enjoy or can't do long mental tasks, homework that takes an extended amount of time, projects that involve a lot of planning or lots of steps, staying on track during, homeschool, even at play. They would be the child that can't do a long-term play scenario with friends. They're disorganized, forgetful. They struggle to listen when they're spoken to directly. They don't pay close attention to details, lose things often, make careless mistakes, and struggle to follow through with instructions. They often, like I said, this one often goes undiagnosed because we just chalk it up to kind of personality, to daydreaming, forgetfulness, things like that. So that's kind of what we're looking at there, the inattentive part. But then those on the kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, we think like these sometimes are opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're not exclusionary. You can't have, only one or the other. You can have kind of a combination, which is, a real struggle. But these ones I think are more recognizable. These are the high energy, constant moving, sometimes as a former teacher, oh my goodness, problem child, can't get him to sit in his chair, right? They're blurting out answers before you even finish the question. They're interrupting classmates. They can't wait for their turn. They're constantly talking. They're fidgeting, tapping, squirming, making an instrument out of about everything in your classroom. They get up when it's not appropriate, when a teacher is talking, or in the middle of an activity that you think, would be engaging, lunchtime, dinner time, running, climbing in inappropriate situations, unable to play quietly, always on the go. So that's a little bit more the hyperactivity part of it. But then, we're also dealing with the impulsivity of it. That's also a behavioral challenge of it. And then, like I said, there's also that combination of the different factors that someone could present as kind of elements of both. So, like I said, I was going to talk more about diagnosing ADHD. You need to do, and again, I am not that healthcare professional, though I do have a lot of mental health training and experience. They need to do a complete medical history check because lots of other conditions can actually be causing some of these behavioral and cognitive symptoms, but they're really a result of other conditions or factors. So things that could mimic or cause this, and I'm actually going to start from the bottom because I want to focus more on the top. So lead toxicity, that is, hopefully we're getting away from some of that in our environment and in our homes and our schools, but that has actually been shown to cause these symptoms and these issues. Depression, anxiety, sleep problems. If the child is having trouble sleeping, the symptoms of that and how the body is going to cope could look like either one of those, the inattentive or the hyperactivity, because, they're not getting enough rest mentally. Thyroid issues, actually, an overactive or an underactive, high or low thyroid issues can cause either end of that spectrum as well. And so that's an important thing, especially if you have a family history of it. My family did, and so we tested pretty early on for thyroid issues in my family, and addressing some of that has been supportive for my siblings, though they do still have an official ADD, ADHD diagnosis. The thyroid does play into that. Undetected seizures. So focal seizures or temporal lobe seizures. There's some types of seizures that don't manifest like we normally think of a seizure, a grand mal seizure, epileptic seizures kind of thing. But there are some brain seizures that are not as outwardly evident that can also cause some of this behavior. Now these are the ones I really want to focus on. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of misdiagnosing here because of environment or family situations, recent major life changes, divorce, death in a family, a recent move, chronic stress and trauma. Chronic stress and trauma, that's one of my areas of research and specialty about how that affects children and their developing brains. So a whole other information on this, but chronic stress, especially in a child's developing years, forces that brain into constant fight or flight. That trauma, it triggers the amygdala to put the brain into survival mode. And when you're constantly in survival mode, got to protect myself, I need to be hyper aware of a danger. When it's not, I'm running from a bear, but the bear is at home, or there's bullying, the bear is at school, and I need to constantly be hyper aware to protect myself. And the brain physiologically is in that state of hyper awareness, of fight or flight. It is diverting literally blood flow and pathways from the prefrontal cortex. It says, I don't have time to learn spelling words or memorize multiplication tables. I'm trying to stay alive, and I'm trying to stay okay. Just basic survival. And when a child is in that mode, especially early on in formative developmental years, I'm talking 0 to 5, then some of the brain pathways do not get developed, or they get developed in maladaptive ways. For example, triggers that are not or should not necessarily be triggering or anxiety inducing for a child suddenly now are, because the child is in that survival mode in their brain. Physiologically, I'm talking about brain structure, chemistry, pathways here. And so that chronic stress or trauma, a really great book for you to look at is The Deepest Well, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. She is now the Surgeon General of California, and she's a pediatrician that did a lot of work, and she was getting lots of teachers, parents bringing in their children like, oh, they have ADD, ADHD, they can't sit still in class, they can't focus, they can't do their homework, put them on something for the ADD. And as she did a little bit more digging and realized, the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences that they were experiencing in their life, again, I could do a whole other video on that because that's something that I'm super passionate about. She realized that, okay, it's not that this child, yes, they can't focus, but the reason they can't focus is because they have these things going on at home, or this past trauma that their body, their brain is trying to handle and cope with. And so I feel like that is a really big piece. Again, I'm not discounting the actual diagnosis of ADD, ADHD, and those symptoms or the challenges that come along with it, whether it's the impulsivity, the attention struggles, all of that those aren't real. We still need to address them, and we can support them, which is the next step here. But I think that's a really important thing for us to look at when looking at this as a whole. So we got to treat those underlying causes. You got to treat the trauma first. Therapy is amazing, counseling, peer support, just being able to have peers or friends that you can talk about and discuss some of those things with. And then there's some really great oils for trauma specifically. And again, if you're dealing with abuse or, other specific things, but I just wanted to highlight the trauma ones. So oils for that include Hope. It's an amazing blend. Geranium, clove, helichrysum is very healing. Lang-a-lang, jasmine, console, yarrow palm. You could look up each of those individually or message, and I could give you more information about those ones specifically. But those are some really good ones to help the healing of maybe the root cause of this. If we're just treating symptoms and that's not really the bulk of what's happening, that there's still underlying things, it's just a Band-Aid solution. So, but that being said, we do have some tools for the other part. So let's look at the cognitive aspect. So absent-mindedness, difficulty focusing, short attention span. So these are, I think we struggle with a little bit more into adulthood. Some of these things that kind of stay with us even after we've learned coping skills of how to get through school or get things done. These still stay with us. So lemon is the oil of focus, activates the mind. Rosemary is the oil of knowledge and transition, really great for memory and retention. So I always, when studying for tests or finals all the way into college, I would put lemon and rosemary on my forehead when I was studying, and then again right before taking the test. Thinker is an oil of focus as well, specifically designed for children, supportive of concentration. balance is the oil of grounding. So with this difficulty focusing, short attention, you need to kind of help yourself or the child or whoever it is ground themselves so that they feel a little bit more steady, a little bit more supported. And then in tune, I love this one. It's oil of presence, a kind of a contrast to lemon, which will kind of activate the mind. It quiets and grounds mental forces, and it's really great for addressing a short attention span, kind of helping you learn how to extend that attention span. Now, the behavioral component of hyperactivity, aggression, impulsivity, irritability, that part of it, lavender, the oil of communication and calm. Some of that aggression comes from maybe not being able to express, not being able to feel heard. Calmer is another blend specifically designed for kids, very restful, addresses feeling out of control, worried, overwhelmed. Vetiver, this is a really amazing one. It's been very supportive for several of my siblings. The oil of centering and descent. So it's very rooting. It almost smells like dirt. I'll be honest. It's not one of my favorite smells, but I can't deny the power that it has. So it's very rooting and it brings you back to earth. And then forgive. I was kind of, as I was doing a little bit of research, I was kind of maybe surprised by this one a little bit more. The forgive addresses some of the cynicism, the irritability, the bitterness that kind of comes from, maybe is a root or kind of one of those underlying pieces to the behavioral issue, the hyperactivity and aggression. Then there's rescuer. That's an oil of soothing. It restores you to a calmer baseline, helps identify hidden pain. That was one of my favorite things about that one, that it kind of helps you calm down enough to be like, okay, what's really going on here? And then I almost didn't put this one because so peppermint, it's an amazing one. I always think about it for headaches, it's the oil of buoyant heart, but it's very has a refreshing clarity component to it. So when you're trying to focus, when you're trying to calm down the irritability, the impulsivity, it can bring a lot of clarity in a very refreshing way. Like a mint, it's very, bright like that. It has a calm energy to it. So it's going to help focus. It's kind of going to bring you back down a little bit, but still give you enough energy to then focus. So I love that. So some really great tools that you can use. Okay, so there is just a brief overview of ADD, ADHD. Again, we got to talk about those root causes, but we've also got some really great tools that can help you with some of those challenges that you might be facing. So have a happy Monday and take care of yourself. Be kind to your mind.